I'm Brian Fowler, president of Blind Creek Resources Limited, listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, ticker symbol BCK. Blind Creek is focused in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and British Columbia. The company's key property is the Blend Project, one of the largest undeveloped lead-zinc-silver deposits in Western Canada, plus plans to advance the recently acquired, fully permitted historic engineer gold mine in the Atlan District of Northwestern BC. Check us out at blindcreekresources.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Hi, Jim. It's great to be here.
Oil gets nothing but bad-mouthed all the time. It's messy, it's dirty, it's a symbol of the past. But just how important is crude oil to the Canadian economy?
Well, it's got to be said, it is irreplaceable in our daily lives. Everyone uses it. It really doesn't matter if you're someone who wants to, as I hope we all do, want to improve the human imprint on the environment around the world, because it finds its way into our lives in all kinds of ways. And we have to confront that fact. I know it's difficult. Some people, they see red when they hear those words, that we have to deal with this, but I really think it's important in the work I've been doing with ResourceWorks to just get out there and let's have a conversation about it.
Is it true that it pays the rent for our country, as some economists say?
Well, that's a phrase that we heard recently from a distinguished resource economist who came to speak to our advisory council from community groups around BC. And the way that she put it was that crude oil exports are what pay the rent for Canada, not just BC. And that's because of the trade balance, which is a really interesting topic.
When we talk about the trade balance, are we talking about what we import, what we export, what kind of stuff we import, export?
Yeah, we're a trading nation. You know, we're not a big country. We rely on being able to trade our goods, and that's how we built economic prosperity for Canada. That's why we're in the G20. That's why, even though we're only 35 or so million people, we are one of the top countries of our influence and our quality of life, and that's because we are able to export our goods. And 80% of the things that we export are based on natural resources. And then there's other things that we manufacture, be it automobiles or Bombardier craft and different sorts of foodstuffs that we make. But natural resources are the foundation, and within that, crude oil stands head and shoulders, and then some, above all of the others.
Now, of course, the big complaint about crude is when you spill it, it's not very nice.
Well, that's right. And, you know, since the terrible Exxon Valdez accident on the coast of Alaska years back, the attention globally on tanker safety has been very much like the attention we saw since the 1970s until the present time with passenger safety in aircraft. You know, when I was growing up, I remember in the 70s, it seemed like every other week there was some plane crashing into a mountainside somewhere, some terrible loss of life. And that doesn't happen anymore because the traveling public was not willing to stand for it, just like the public today will not stand for oil to be spilled into the ocean. And so since Exxon Valdez was, you know, the worst catastrophe on the coast here, there has been a series of changes to global practices and specifications, the training regimes. You look at all the work that the federal government in Canada has done around the tanker safety regime. It really is on a par with aviation safety. So when I step on a plane these days and I'm flying to Toronto or California, just like most people do on a regular basis, we don't think about the safety, unless you're maybe a small portion of the traveling public who has got some fears. But most people, you look around the plane, no one is worried. They're more concerned about, will I get Wi-Fi or what's to eat on the plane? And it's the same with crude oil shipping. We don't have concerns because we have elevated our practices and our technologies to the point where this has been factored out. And, you know, the vast majority of Canadians recognize it. In a place like BC, there's a little more friction around it because people live by the ocean. They cherish what they see, as they should, because it's irreplaceable. But the fact is that it is safe. We already transport all kinds of goods through that could be called dangerous. Our neighbors to the south in the U.S., they're already on a yearly basis sending twice as many crude oil tankers into Puget Sound, into the Salish Sea, as we will once we get the Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion built. So the precedent is already established for safe shipping in these waters.
Are not all the tankers on the West Coast double-hulled?
Oh, yes, they are.
And has there been any serious accident involving a double-hulled tanker?
No.
Oh, those are pretty fast answers. Do you think people think about that or know about that?
You know, I think there is a tendency to look for examples of catastrophe so that people with a different concern can deal with their frustrations. You know, maybe someone's issue is climate, which is a good issue to have. We all ought to be concerned about it, and there's a lot happening in Canada to improve our performance, but they're not getting excitement from the public because climate, to a lot of people, is kind of boring. You can't see it or touch it in a sense. I mean, obviously it's all around us, but it's not as tangible. So I think there's been a tendency for those who want to get the public's attention on things like climate to instead talk about things that are more tangible and create the excitement around those things. So talking about, some hypothetical scenario which is completely unlikely but still can be visualized, I think is one way. So unfortunately, that's been a way of getting people's attention on the issue when really it would be like saying, I have an issue with my aeroplane point, so I'm going to have a campaign to say that these planes are going to fall out of the sky. Well, I don't think that's entirely honest to do that, frankly, but it's what happens with the crude oil space in Canada. But I think that the positives on crude oil are really the most important thing, because right now there's a real brain teaser here. Suppose that we stopped exporting crude oil from Canada. We just stopped it because there's some people say we should do that. What would happen? Now, we just did a post on our website at resourceworks.com looking at this, and crude oil exports are so big they just tower over even the second biggest, metals and minerals. We export a lot of that. It towers over agri-food and forest products. You take, the next one down, natural gas is way down the list. That's a pretty big industry here, but it is still really small compared to crude oil. And then you ask, well, if we're exporting those things, what about the stuff that we're importing? Now, look around you. All the stuff you're importing, is it an iPhone that's made in China? Is it a car? Maybe you've preferred to have a Japanese car over a Detroit car, so that's got to be imported. All of these different things. You go down to the hospital, that MRI machine that your relative is being put through, where do you think that's built? I don't think we build a lot of those in Canada. It's got to be paid for. All of these things have to be paid for, and that's the trade balance. So we have to have something to balance our imports with, and that's what we export. And crude oil is the biggest thing that we export. So all these people who want to stop producing, extracting, and exporting crude oil, I think they have to have an honest conversation with the public if they really believe those things, and that's a legitimate point of view. But they have to also answer the question, how do we replace those exports? Because we won't be able to import iPhones or cars from Korea, Japan, Germany, or MRI scanners, or orange juice, all of these things that we take for granted. If you're saying we can't have crude oil exports, well, you're also saying we can't import those other things.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after the break.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, I know in Ontario they rely a lot on the auto industry for their manufacturing and the wealth in their province, but how big is the auto industry, say, compared to something like the crude oil industry?
Well, when you look at the auto industry in terms of the number of jobs it's got, the number of things that it come out of the factories, it is a gigantic industry, and there are times when the overall value of all those things moving around the economy out in Ontario mainly is greater than crude oil. But it's actually quite interesting when you look closer at it, because our the economist we asked to look at these issues of crude oil versus other parts of the economy, discovered something really interesting, which is that when it comes to automobiles, we assemble cars in Canada. We don't make all the parts. So when something's put together in Oshawa, that pickup truck or Lincoln Continental put together, it requires imported parts from all over the place. And these assemblies and pieces have to be brought across the border, and they qualify as imports. And until those imports are created into a car, we can't export that car. It has to be made. So there's a very high degree of import content in our automotive exports. And so what that means is the trade balance is not greatly impacted by the automotive industry, even though it's really a great source of jobs and creates a whole lot of economic activity that's very desirable and very necessary to maintaining Southern Ontario's way of life. The fact is it has nothing like the impact on the overall trade balance compared to natural resources, because the thing about natural resources, be it our metallurgical coal, our copper, crude oil, natural gas, is that there's very little in the way of imports that you need to produce it. We can make most of the things we need to extract natural resources and process them. We can make most of that in Canada. Most of it goes into human labor, big component there. And of course we need machines, not all of which we manufacture in Canada, but we do make a lot of machinery for the resource industries. So that helps to keep our trade surplus in the black. So this is one of the interesting things about the Canadian economy, because you'll often hear people say, well, crude oil, it's only around the same size as the auto industry. It's actually probably 2 or 3 times bigger than the export value of the auto industry.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after the break.
Lotus Ventures Inc. is a BC-based medical marijuana company poised to launch into the rapidly evolving cannabis sector. Lotus is in the final review stage of the Health Canada approvals to become a licensed producer, having arranged facility financing of up to $12 million, plus building permits for its prototype indoor production facility. Shares trade under the symbol J on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Visit our website at lotusventures.ca.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, both the BC government and the federal government are slapping carbon taxes on. BC's had a carbon tax for a long time. What kind of a message does that send, and do carbon taxes actually influence the use of fossil fuels?
Well, in BC, where we were the forerunner in implementing a carbon tax, not just in Canada but globally, we saw that very quickly after the carbon tax was introduced in 2008, that the public here got over initial apprehension. You remember back around then, I think the NDP campaigned against the carbon tax. Axe the tax was a slogan back in 2009. But I think since that time, there's been a general acceptance. People have said, you know what, we're paying a little bit extra, but it's a tax that is recycled back to those who are paying it through different forms. It discourages certain sorts of behaviors, excessive use of these precious fuels, and it doesn't penalize the user, so it's okay. Now, more recently, we've seen greater widespread adoption of the BC model and different kinds of models, carbon trading, and there's some areas of the country where it's more controversial. I think in Alberta, a little more friction in the public space on this question, a lot more division, although I think they've come up with a pretty good model there. And then, of course, the national scheme for carbon pricing in Canada, which is roping in every province, even Saskatchewan, which has said it is not too keen on it, but everyone is coming along for it. So, within Canada, harmonizing the different provinces and territories has been a bit of a challenge. But where it's going to get interesting is the international scene, because right now, Canada, we are, in a great sense, a competitor with the U.S., as well as being a customer and trading partner with them. But we're seeing with the Trump administration not a lot of enthusiasm down south in terms of adopting the climate protecting policies that we are. And the great conundrum for any politician, and it really doesn't matter what political party they belong to, this is economy, not politics, has to deal with the problem of consumer behavior when we have differential pricing. And just think about, you're driving around in your car, you live in White Rock, or any area that is not too far from the USA, and you believe that the price to fill your tank down south is a lot lower. What are you going to do? Now, if we have highly punitive carbon taxes vis-a-vis that kind of decision, we're going to see a lot of that sort of cross-border shopping take place. Of course, it happens now on a big scale, but I would expect even more. But it's in the industrial end that I'm more concerned about. Just last weekend I was reading about the methane policy, and before President Obama left office last year, he and Prime Minister Trudeau sat down, got out their pens and ink to document committing both countries to some methane gas escape targets, 45% reduction, that would bind both countries to improve their environmental behavior. And that was applauded by environmentalists. Well, President Trump came in. One of the first things he did was abolish that. In Canada, we've said we're going to stay the course, we're going to keep that, which I think is a laudable thing. But at the same time, it is inevitably going to create a competitive disadvantage. And, one of the odd things about it is that if it forces Canadian gas production to be reduced over time, we're still going to be using gas to heat our homes, cook our food, but we're going to be importing it from a cheaper source, from the USA, which will probably not have carbon taxes, and it won't have these methane measures that have a cost. So the perverse effect of such a policy, if not well managed, can be that it drives economic opportunities south of the border from Canada.
Also, you have Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson banning natural gas in any new homes constructed in Vancouver.
Yes, and this is probably one of the strangest policies around. Those who are aware of the positive trend in climate change policy are aware that it's natural gas around the world that is really the only thing that's creating any positive momentum in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And here's the mayor of Vancouver wants to ban that very thing. And I think the other thing that is driving people in industry crazy, and you've seen the Business Council, the Board of Trade, a whole bunch of other organizations, they've been writing letters expressing their puzzlement as to what this is really about. They're trying to figure out what to do, because you see the appliance industry, they're selling these 99% efficient natural gas furnaces you can get in your home. Now, don't you feel good if you went out yesterday and paid a few $1,000s for a 99% efficient furnace and put that in your home, and you got a very low gas bill as a result? Wouldn't you feel you were doing the right thing? But in the city of Vancouver, you're a climate criminal now.
Well, the electricity that they supposedly are going to replace natural gas with is a whole lot more expensive. You'll have people who can't afford it.
Oh, yeah, that's what will happen. It's happened in Ontario. You look at Europe, where the price of electricity is very high. You've got a huge amount of the average family's earnings that have to go in to paying just for the household power needs. And, it probably means that you're not turning the washing machine on as much, you're keeping the lights off, and, there are people who can, I guess, suck that up, but it's going to be a change in how people live. I don't see the city people out there talking about these impacts. In fact, they're saying the opposite. They're saying it's actually going to be cheaper with electricity, which makes absolutely no sense.
Well, it might be cheaper if you have your own solar panels, your own batteries, and don't have to rely on hydro.
Well, it might be cheaper, but you'd need a lot of solar panel to cover that. I was recently out in Calgary. I wanted to see a renowned community center that's got a solar panel installation. It's a huge thing. They have a couple of rinks. They got swimming pools. It's in the south of Calgary, and I went up on top of that roof with the building manager to have a look at it. I always like exploring anything to do with energy. I'm a real energy junkie. So I went out, climbed up there, and sure enough, that whole roof, the whole complex is covered with solar panels. It was an awe-inspiring sight. And, it's Calgary. It gets those bright prairie days, even in the winter, and it generates some electricity. So, of course, I had to know, how much of the building's requirements are met by this acreage of solar panels. And the building manager seemed a little hesitant to answer, but he cleared his throat and told me it was 3%. So I worked out that if you wanted to meet the needs of all of the requirements of that one rec center, you'd have to cover the equivalent of all of downtown Calgary with solar panels to do that. Now, never mind what you do at night. That's another problem. But, such is the difficulty of the energy transition that as we move towards a low-carbon world, which everyone acknowledges we have to do, it's not that simple.
Yes, it's a nice dream, and it's great. Now, in California, at times, they meet 50% of their power needs by solar, but California is a whole lot different than Canada.
Yeah, and I think they call that the Duckbill curve, where you've got this phenomenal incidence of production at certain times of the day when the sun's bright, or if it's wind we're talking about and the wind's really blowing, you get a spike, and other sources of electricity are curtailed or sent elsewhere. So that could be coal-fired or natural gas-fired or nuclear powered sources. But in the current way that things are done, when that sun goes down behind the mountains or the wind stops blowing, what are you going to do? You still have to have those energy sources. And so a lot of people are searching for that holy grail of storage for the power so that it can be held on for later. And right now, that is just a huge scientific challenge that lots of people want to solve, but it still hasn't been solved.
Well, one project I saw concerns you use the solar to heat sand, kind of like at the midpoint of a sand glass or a sand timer that you would use for cooking eggs. And so you heat that sand up to an incredible temperature. You run water pipes through it at night. It generates steam. The steam turns turbines. It's a great theory. No one's made it really work yet.
Yeah, that's right. People have been trying with photovoltaic cells since I think the 1840s to solve some of the physics around this. And, you look at other sources, the chemical energy stored in natural gas, it's already solved. We know exactly how it works. We can store it. You put it in, a basin, or you put it in a bottle, whatever you want to do. You make it into LNG by cooling it, or you have compressed natural gas. It's so flexible. You can do all these different things. I think that's why it's so appealing, because you can do that. Whereas it's so difficult to put wind into a storage that it's currently defied. I was looking at the biggest wind farms in the world, and there's some enormous ones, and I was wondering what would happen if you wanted to switch out all of the natural gas that the city of Vancouver uses. How much wind activity would you need? How many wind turbines? And I'm still working on the figures, but I think it's probably you'd need the biggest wind farm in the world and then some in order to power just the city of Vancouver, which isn't that big a city. Just talking about the city limits proper, to do that. You'd need a vast amount of wind turbine use, or you'd need more Site Cs. And gosh, look how controversial the Site C hydro dam is in northeast BC.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Jim. Always a pleasure to be on your show.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. If you have any questions for the show or for our guests, you can send them to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.